Before we start this event, I borrowed some information from our city's website. It is important to acknowledge that we are gathered upon the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary homelands of the Dakota. Through treaties, the United States government seized Ojibwe and Dakota land in Minnesota. Specifically, signing of the treaties of the Traverse des Sioux and Mendota in 1851 opened land located to the west of Ha-Ha-Wakpa, which is River of the Falls, and Wakpa-Unka, which is Great or Large River. We know this river as the Mississippi. This allowed pioneers to settle in what is now Eden Prairie. We acknowledge that this land has a complex and layered history. We pay respect to the elders who have stewarded the land throughout the generations and continue to do so. We offer this statement as a step toward healing and make a commitment to learn the history of the land of Eden Prairie and preserve is built on, to recognize, support, collaborate with, and advocate for Indigenous people, and to consider the convergence of legacies that brings us here today. Today is a very special day as we mark this moment in history. We also look back at some wonderful memories that the Preserve has been a part of. About a year ago, we realized that on June 19th, 1972, the Preserve Association was made legal by the Secretary of State. So through the direction of the Board of Directors, we have been preparing for this significant milestone for about the last year. We wanted to commemorate our rich history. We are honored tonight to have a few distinguished guests that will be sharing some of their experiences and knowledge of our community. First, I'd like to ask Mayor Ron Case to share some of his thoughts.
Great, thank you. I think I'm going to be okay without a microphone. Many of you know that I'm a 33-year retired Eden Prairie school teacher, 3rd and 5th grade, which you may or may not realize, most of those years, 21 of them were spent at Oak Point. But my career started in 1979, being hired by a school that had broken off from Prairie View and was going to be just for the Preserve, and bus the students up to Cahill Elementary, which was an empty building in the Edina school system in 1979. It had actually started, I think, the spring before that. Some of you may know some of that history, but I started then my career with Preserve kids, and then I worked for 8 years, taking them to Long Lake, if you remember. No, I'm sorry, Long Lake was actually Eden Lake and Prairie View. Taking them to Isabella, which was only a camp way up north that only the Preserve Cahill kids got to go to, a 5-day camp. So my history with the Preserve, fondly remember the beginning of my career, and I'm looking out now. Some of you, I actually had students. Lee's son I had in my very first year of teaching, 3rd grade, and had him again in 5th grade. So super nice to be here. The Preserve I've lived in several times throughout my life for various reasons. Where's my wife, Kathy? I was going to say with a couple wives, that's probably not as cool as what it should be. But nonetheless, the most important one of 34 years, I also lived right south of the Preserve with Kathy, president of the Historical Society. You'll hear more from her. She is the wife of my life. I mean to say that, and the love of my life. Okay, did I make up? Okay, whatever. Super nice to be here on the 50th. As some of you know, there are some photographs, I guess, of me on some golf cart at the 25th. I don't think I've changed a lot, but I guess I actually did. I have dark hair and the whole bit. But so I go back and my wife took our kids. We were members of the pool here, so we just have deep roots with the Preserve. One of the things as mayor that you look back on before the time that I became mayor is that we've only had 10 mayors in the history of Eden Prairie since '63, and the city council's made some really big decisions, good ones in the '60s, but one that to this day some of us, maybe you do, maybe not, regret is that this had been planned at one time to be quite a city within a city. And it was going to be a remarkable, if you notice in Eden Prairie with 18 lakes and a river and 3 creeks, we do not have, except for Redstone, which barely is on a lake, we don't have celebration of our water. We don't have boardwalks and restaurants. We had the opportunity here, and at the time the city council, I wasn't part of it obviously, I was a little kid in the 60s, decided that they were still trying to build the city out, still trying to get the mall, and they didn't want a city within a city is what my belief is. At any rate, we didn't materialize to that, but it did materialize to the incredibly beautiful preserve that it is today. So I'm very proud of that, and I think all of you, I'm assuming you have some connection to it since you're here, if not living here now, that you agree that it turned out quite well. I'm going to read a proclamation that's by me, but also a representative of the City Council, who 2 of them, my members, I'll introduce momentarily. You'll learn a little bit of history here briefly. Whereas the preserve, like much of Eden Prairie, was initially beautiful prairie turned farmland, in the 1850s, after the initiation of the Homestead Act by the U.S. Congress, Robert Anderson, one of the very first residents and founders of the area known as the Village of Eden Prairie, homesteaded much of what is now the preserve. Thus, Anderson Lakes, Anderson's Parkway, right? Whereas in 1891, some of this original homestead was sold to William Nesbitt. Marianne, do you know anything about that? I saw you back there.
Yeah.
A little bit. The Nesbitt family farmed it for over 3 generations. In 1971, the Nesbitt homestead, along with several other properties, were sold to Carter and Gertz Development Company. Did I see? What was I looking for? I thought I saw. It is, okay. No,
John did it.
okay, thank you. Development Company and the Minneapolis Gas Company, which at the time was Minnegasco, who proceeded to develop one of the nation's first planned communities. Whereas the Preserve Association, which oversees the management and maintenance of preserve amenities, was incorporated in 1972, and whereas the Preserve Association includes property owners of single-family homes, twin homes, townhomes, condominiums, and apartment complexes, there are a total of 1,693 residential units with over 5,000 people living here today. And whereas the preserve consists of 187 acres of common properties, including 5 miles of walking paths and trails, a filtered sand-bottom pool, the only one that I know of in the whole area, one of the finest, certainly in Eden Prairie, we love that. Lighted tennis and pickleball courts, sand volleyball, and monthly events hosted here in the preserve barn. And whereas the mission of the Preserve Association is to create and maintain a desirable place to live with a strong sense of community, whereby the preserve, as Property Homeowners Association, provides guidelines, facilities, and services to achieve this end. Now, therefore, got to the end, I, Ron Case, Mayor of Eden Prairie, along with the City Council, do hereby proclaim the week of July 17th to 23rd, 2022 as the Preserve Association Week here in Eden Prairie. Signed by So I want to make a couple introductions and give up the stage. First, my there's 5 people on the City Council. I'm an equal voting member, so I have 4 City Council members. We have 2 of them here today. Council Member Mark Freiberg. Council Member Lisa Toomey. I'm very honored today to have 2 of our several elected officials, but we only have 1 senator, and then this area only has 1 state representative. So we have both of them here today, which is pretty special. So Carly Cotiza-Wittun, always have to think the K, representative. And then Senator Steve Swazensky, fellow, retired. I think I got you beat. You're only 32 years of teaching.
33.
Oh wait, but I'm 33 in 3 months. I don't think you are.
No, I don't have.
Yeah, I got you beat. So
Retired student teaching?
Oh, okay, whatever. Retired. Yeah, you got me beat. Retired high school teacher, Senator Steve Swazensky. I don't think I've missed anyone else, school board or anybody that's elected official. You're pointing. Who are you pointing to?
Steve Barnes, I'm the school board.
Oh, thank you so much. Ms. School board member, thank you for being here. Thank you. You live in the preserve? You live in the preserve as well? All right. You might be the only. No, Mark. Well, you live right south of it, but technically not in. Yeah. Okay. So Do you want me, Scott, then to turn it over right away to Senator, or do you want to get back in here with what we're
I
doing?
just was going to thank you and invite the senator to come up and share some of his.
I think you're going the wrong way, yeah.
Okay.
I thought it was back there.
He wants me to go first.
No, I mean, you know. Okay, okay.
Thank you.
Representative Carly Cotiza-Watun.
Thank you. For having me here with you to celebrate tonight. This is such a fun event and I see lots of familiar faces. Well, my husband and I have spent now already somehow over a decade of our life here at Eden Prairie. It's also an honor to represent this portion of the city that contains the preserve. I know I've met a lot of you and I've heard so many great things about the amenities that you guys are able to access here as residents, but also that our community can access as surrounding residents of the preserve and in Eden Prairie. It's been just wonderful to get to know you, and I'm so glad to be here to celebrate, and I look forward to hearing a little bit more about your time here at Eden Prairie over 50 years, and on and on and on. And it really gives me a lot of joy to know that because you guys have spent so much of your life here and the contributions that the preserve has made, we know that we've chosen the right community to raise our family in, and it's just an honor to represent this community at the Capitol. So thank you so much for your time and for being here.
Hi, so I taught, like as Ron said, I taught American history and American government at Eden Prairie High School for 31 years. So that might be the confusion, but I did teach for 33 years, not counting student teaching. And I loved American history, and I appreciate, Scott, those opening remarks about the native indigenous population here, because, you know, I grew up at a time, and I just want to, Lee, I don't know who else was here 50 years ago when Humphrey spoke at the dedication, but Lee was, and so that's amazing. So anyways, you know, I taught American history. Well, anyways, you know, I grew up in the 60s in Superior, Wisconsin. It was my favorite oxymoron when I was a kid growing up. And this English joke here, Superior, thank you. And you know, I literally hitchhiked away from Superior, Wisconsin in the 70s because no one had vision up there. No one had a dream. No one had a common goal like the people that built the preserve. And when you look at the list of all the different organizations that are responsible for this place, it does one's heart good. Because this is a nation, I'm going to close with this, what I want to say is, well, so I'll save that. So anyways, I taught American history at the high school and American government. I loved it, every minute of it. And, you know, like I would, because I have a lot of history jokes, right? Like, you know, the Pilgrims, why they brought guitars and drums with them to the New World? Because they wanted to see Plymouth Rock. And then George Washington, Lee went to Washington, D.C. with me, and George Washington is buried standing up if you ever get to Mount Vernon. And, you know, everybody always asks, you know, the tour guides, you know, why is he buried standing up in his crypt? And they, you know, they just couldn't get him to lie. And so, anyways, got a lot of jokes, but, you know, Hubert Humphrey, if you ever get to the Hubert Humphrey Memorial, across from the Capitol in St. Paul, there's a beautiful memorial to Hubert Humphrey. And it's stunning. It's just so simple and it's beautiful. But I love at the base of the memorial, alongside inscripted in the wall, it says, "You judge a civilization by how well it treats those in the dawn of life, by those that are in the shadows of life, and how well it treats those in the dusk of life." And I just really, truly love those words spoken by a guy that was here 50 years ago this year. And so anyways, so I taught American history for all those years, and I loved every minute, and I've learned more about the preserve in the last couple of days. I met with Carol Bombin. She told me a lot of history of this place, and the Anderson family, they're a legacy. They had one of their grandchildren on the Minnesota Supreme Court. It's a pretty impressive group of people. But what I love, and I don't remember seeing pickleball courts in the article from 1972, so that's interesting that they decided to leave that out. And what I love about the preserve, well, thanks, delayed laugh, I love that, thank you. And you know, back to your opening remarks about the indigenous people, when I was in your age, you know, when I was a young man growing up in school, we learned only one version of history. And in college, I read 2 books that changed my life and changed how I became a teacher and what I decided to teach as a teacher. And one was Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which tells the story of the indigenous experience from their point of view. And then the other one, which I probably shouldn't talk about, but it was Lies My Teacher Told Me. And it's all about all the things that maybe we, back in the 60s on back, didn't learn the total history of America. It was more than just one culture. And I just really, those 2 books changed my life. But anyways, with that said, I just want to talk real briefly about the preserve, because as I said, in the 70s, I fled Superior, Wisconsin, because no one had the vision or the dream of creating anything that would last forever, like the people that founded the preserve, and the common good, and the spirituality of maintaining the woods and the trails, and getting people to have an active lifestyle, and getting away from their 3-channel TV sets outside. And that we've lost that vision. And they had a vision of it takes a village, and that we're going to have mixed-use housing, and we're going to have all these variety of people, and we're going to put them into one little community, and let's see if this utopian vision for the future can work. And 50 years later, I think you can agree that yes, it has. Because back in the 60s, we didn't think about preserving things. And we had rivers on fire in Ohio, and our thank you for your memory, the Cayuga River, maybe. Yeah, anyways, our national symbol was endangered to extinction. We couldn't swim. You know, you have a pool, 2 pools, but one is this wonderful sand pool, because in the 60s they had to shut down the swimming beaches in Superior, Wisconsin, because you couldn't swim in it. And this was on the largest freshwater lake on the planet Earth. And yet down here they had this dream and this goal. And while people in LA couldn't breathe because of the smog, the people in Eden Prairie thought, let's make a place where we think about the future, and we preserve the environment, and we get people outside to play pickleball, and we do all these wonderful things. And so anyways, I was thinking about today, and because you know, the history teacher in me, remember, I didn't just tell history jokes. You know what, one eye said to the other eye, something's come between us and it smells. And so I didn't just tell, hey, don't indulge me, okay? Because once I get a laugh, I want to keep going. But you may not know this, or but it was on this date, not 50 years ago, but 53 years ago, that Neil Armstrong took that first step on the moon. Today. And he said, you know, that's one small step for man, for America, and one giant leap for mankind, for America. And I think about that quote all the time, because we as a nation had a dream, we had a vision, we had a common goal. By the end of this decade, we're going to put an American on the moon. And as an elected official, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us here, we deal with the division in our country all the time. And I think of the preserve, and what you guys tried to do 50 years ago, to have this common dream that we're going to live together, and we're going to get outside, and we're going to make all these incredible investments in the environment, and in sport, and swimming, and tennis courts, and horses. I don't know if that became a reality, but the important thing is you had this dream. And I often think about, is that what America's lacking right now? Is we no longer have that common dream, that common goal, that common vision. And I've been thinking about that for a couple days now, ever since I met Carol last weekend at the Smith House, and she asked me to say a few opening remarks. And when I found out all the wonderful history of this place, and I found out that today was Neil Armstrong's famous line, I started putting everything together. And I ask you guys, just all of you that were here 50 years ago, Lee, all of you that live here today, all of you that are here tonight because you share that common love of American history right here in the preserve. I cannot thank you enough, because you know what? This was a utopian vision. That's what this was. It was utopian vision. And this country could use you right now. And if you have any ideas or dreams or visions of yourself for our grandchildren, contact Carly at her office, and she'd love to take those ideas, as would I. I'm kidding, but man, because I often think our hopes and our dreams and our goals, are they unattainable? Are they impossible? Or are they possible and attainable and realistic? And I hope you believe, after being here this evening, that the answer, as I do, that the answer is yes. Because you did it 50 years ago, we can do it again. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Senator. Council people, any interest in?
I live right outside the preserve by 1 block. I've lived there 41 years. I never could understand what happened to that block. I live in Granholm and Buckingham. Come on, it's just 2 blocks there. There's Cromwell, there's Buckingham, and it's not part of the preserve. But I'm well aware of the history of the preserve as far as the amenities, that pool. I think that pool, what I've heard, might even be better than what you said. I think that's 1 of 5 in the country or something. It's way up there, like only a couple in the country. It's an amazing thing that that was created on that. And I've been out here 41 years. I live here for the same reasons you do, of course. That it's an amazing city, and I'm very proud of it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now we have a very special guest to tell you some stories about living here and playing here long before the preserve was an idea in anybody's mind. We have Marianne Nesbitt here, and I believe we have some other Nesbitts in the crowd as well. I saw it on a name tag anyway, so we're honored to have all of you here tonight. And so Marianne, if you could come up.
Marianne.
Hello, everybody. It's really an honor to be here.
Speak up.
Especially since
Speak up.
I'm honored to be here, especially since I was present when this property was sold and when we needed to work to help promote it. So I worked here at the office, giving a beautiful presentation about the wildlife and the future plans of development here. This was put together by John Jr. Carter. He did a great job. My father and his brother farmed here for many, many years. They were very, very good to the land, which was great because with that, they evolved as great farmers and nurturers and protectors of their land. So when it came time that they knew they had to sell, they were really adamant about keeping this land in its beauty and flora. There were many that came and called on the guys to sell, break it up. You know, the old Anderson farms did that. They sold off in pieces. They made a lot more money. But Standard Ralph said, no, it's going to go in 1 lump sum, and there's certain things that we want. So when Carter and Gertz approached them, this all came into fruition. It's great. And they worked alongside the builders. They chose certain builders. They had high standards and requirements. As many of you know, you got homes here. And some even lived here for years, which is pretty cool. So I worked here for a couple of years. It was really exciting. Tennis courts were open. I learned how to play tennis. We had people that came from all over. And we were promoting the different developments and the idea. The swimming pool was created out of a paddock, and the diving well was a home that was turned into a diving well. Our first lifeguard was my classmate. We just had our 50-year reunion the other week, Joanne Cookham. And they even lived in my folks' house when they were first married, he and Laura. So as kids, we loved being here. We had deer at our beckoning. We had wild fox, had hawks, owls, big beautiful birds, and migration of birds that came over Anderson Lake. Pelicans, geese, snow geese. The first Canadian geese were brought here by General Mills. They ended up nesting here and created chaos. But my dad and Ralph decided that they would also do beef. So they rented the farm down here, which was originally the Ewald Dairy. Beautiful layout. I think there were 5 different homes that went with the property. They had a bunkhouse for hired hands and stanchions and milking barns that could milk 150 cattle twice a day. And they did nothing but Swiss. So it was quite an operation, and when that sold, my understanding the next owner was Charlie of Charlie Prairie, downtown Minneapolis. And he was into sulky racing, and he built a sulky track, which was now in the lake in that area. And he actually kept horses here. So we farmed with the beef down here. We milked 32 cattle, 32 Holsteins twice a day. And one year, my dad gifted us, as kids, 2 Shetland ponies. And talk about fun. A neighbor down the road made a park for us out of bicycle parts. And one of the ponies was a trick pony. So we really had a lot of fun. We often went swimming at the end of the day chore at Bryant Lake, which had a beautiful clear pond bed, or spring bed lake. So with that being said, we worked really hard. Hay season was a big demand. We got neighborhood boys, young men and girls too, involved in putting up hay, which we did down here in the big barns, let alone blowing up hay and baling hay. So with that being said, Ralph and Marion had 10 children and Stan and Irene had 3. I'm the 6th born, one of 4 girls. And my cousin Scott, I think, is still here, and I've got a nephew, a niece here, and another distant relative, so yeah, it's nice. But I was going to say, with all that hard work, we came to know true responsibility. And my dad was a councilman. He was a zoning board member and a councilman, so he was quite involved with this village becoming a city and being a part of that regulatory entity and a council. He was very eager to find just the right type of buyer, and he and Stan did a good job with that part of it. And it was nice to see them working along with my folks to make this come into fruition. And Stan and Ralph both came back and worked for the preserve, especially with putting those rocks around the swimming pools and putting up the trees, and then hiring the staff to come and do the mowing and the upkeep. 24/7, I guess, yeah, it's 24/7. So Dad didn't retire until he was 83. And I think some of you probably met him, some of you early homeowners may have met Stan and Ralph. Dad passed away in 2004, and Stan passed away before that. But I also wanted to talk about some of the history that I was told as a kid. Where you have your Basswood townhomes and that Basswood Road that goes up a slight hill. On top of that hill is Black Maple Drive. That was the highest point in the farm. And this is where we would go sliding as kids. It was great. We'd get a toboggan run and we'd end up all the way down into the frozen lake. So that's where they built their house. But there was this band of trees that were separate from the forest, where you see the townhomes that are built right into that forest that has been there as long as my dad was a child. And there was a separation. And Dad said, this is from the path that the Indians made, leaving Bush Lake to Anderson Lake and going down to Shawnee, carrying their teepees in the back of their horses. or with their dogs. He said it was a path for the Indians. So he remembers having that connection in his youth to the Indians that lived here. And other than having runaway ponies when you were taking lunch out to the guys in the field, that kind of stuff happened to my sister and I. It was quite the experience. We had different people that came and boarded horses at our place, so a lot of us kids all learned how to ride. We had a wonderful horse show here, a hunter jumper, and out in the paddock, which was created back where the barns were, and where Neil Lake is now. And they came from all over, and they set up these jumps, and we had this wonderful woman from Long Lake that brought her pack with her, and it was an exciting time. So that's another, you can see there's still a picturesque over there of that event. So other than that, it was just a pleasure to work with this company. It was a pleasure to grow up here. We had great parents. We had great uncle and his wife and kids. I treasure it. You've got this beautiful land, and I can go through here and I identify trees that are still here from my youth, that were big old trees and some were smaller trees. That's pretty cool to see. And the other thing is when you come off of 169 and come up Anderson Lakes here, to your right is this wooded area. And when I was a kid, that was all grass. There were a few cedar trees, seedlings, but it was considered the idle acres. And then they would rotate cattle in there. And they had a fence up that blocked them from the lake. And that was not as a forest. And this also happened up here where they put the townhomes, which is right near the Prairie Shopping Center. And that area, there was a speedway from where the road is to where there's townhomes. That was all just grass, and now it's a forest as well. So it was great to see this evolve and change in this area that's still flourishing, it's still growing and changing. And then in the winter, there's lots of trails and walking trails and beautiful places to enjoy the outdoors. Well, thank you.
Next, we have Kathy Case, who is the president of the Eden Prairie Historical Society. They have been incredible partners with us over our journey in gathering information and maps and artifacts. And Kathy, thanks for being here.
I grew up in Flemington, and I graduated in 1974 from Lincoln. And there were a lot of people that I knew, of course not me, that came to the preserve to party because it was just all open land. They had bonfires, and I know about this. I remember hearing about it. Anyway, I actually lived in the preserve. It was my first place I ever lived in Eden Prairie. I lived up at Neil Lake Apartments, and it was in the era where a lot of Vikings lived there while they were building homes or deciding where to live. It was a very prestigious apartment building in its time. And I was a single mom, and I had a 3-year-old, and that I was trying to decide where to live, and I lived there for about a year and a half. And the preserve, the house that Muffy and Kurt Johnson have today, that was the preserve offices. And I used to walk my daughter with the wagon, and used to go right through, some of you probably remember that, you went right through their yard, and you went down, you walked around the lake, and I loved it. I just loved living there. And I got to know the Johnson family when they purchased the house, and Muffy has been my dearest friend forever, for 34 years. And the Johnsons bought that house in 1986, and they restored it beautifully, and they continue to maintain it, and it's a very, very historic home. So what I've researched, and the one thing about history that's kind of exciting, you always learn more things, because Helen Anderson can only write about the people she talked with. And there's a lot of people that were already gone, that had already left. And so she didn't get to talk to Aaron Neal, or William Neal, or the Griswolds, or the Frizzles, or the other people that once lived in that house. And it's got quite a history. And it's really wonderful that the preserve did not tear it down. they kept it as their offices. And when I used to walk by it, I used to see, people working in there as they were planning what they were going to be doing here. And then one day I saw this man out there painting a door, and I yelled up, "Did you just buy this house? I'm so excited you're saving it. It's not going to get torn down." And you all know where I'm talking about, right? The white farmhouse right up here. And again, like I said, they continue to maintain it and keep it up. I want to go back to the house and tell you a little bit about the history of it in a minute, but I do want to tell you a couple things that happened to me after I moved into a townhome later. I stayed a member here at the preserve so that I could continue to use the pool, because that pool is incredible. And I did that for a long time. Took swimming lessons here with all of my kids. When I married Ron, we bought a farmhouse on Pioneer Trail. I still launched the preserve pool. My boys grew up here. They became lifeguards here. We are here all the time. I still continue to bring my grandkids here, and it's just a very special place. So it's been a part of my life. The two things that happened to me at the pool that I want to share. When my kids were little, I was with Muffy, and do you remember the boy named T? Anybody recall when T drowned in the pool? And Marine Hamilton saved him, and they got him to the hospital, and he survived. And he was a Cambodian child, and his brother died, fell off the ship when they were arriving here off the boat, and died, and T was their only survivor. And they lived down here in the apartments, and T was in the pool, and he went in the deep end, didn't really know how to swim, and we watched as the lifeguards all held hands, and they found him, and actually he lived, and they had a huge celebration here that he survived, and it was their only child. So that was really an amazing thing to witness, how scary it can be and how wonderful those lifeguards pulled it together. The other was, I was watching Muffy's kids, and we were up at her house having lunch, and it was time for the pool to open at noon. So I said, I'll take all the kids down to the pool, and I'm the only mom with the lifeguards, and they're in the diving pool jumping off the old high dive. And they'd already each gone off the high dive probably 6 times. They were doing tricks with the lifeguards. And Nicky was about 8 years old at the time. He climbed the high dive ladder, and he bumped his knee on the way up. And when he got on the diving board, he lost his balance because he was rubbing his knee because it hurt, and he fell 10 feet onto the concrete. You can imagine, I was his guardian. I was the mom with him. And the lifeguards snapped into action. They called 911. They ran over. The sun was shining, and he was still opening his eyes. And I taught CPR for years, and if the eyes are open and blinking normally, they're breathing. And so we didn't want to move him if we didn't have to, and he was laying on his left side. So we just put an umbrella, we covered him, treated him for shock, we kept talking to him, and he wasn't moving, but he was clearly in shock. Anyway, he got to the hospital. There's Kurt, Wade Kurt, that's the dad. He ended up in the hospital for a few days. He did have a concussion, and he did lose hearing in his left ear because that's what hit first. But Nikki was here earlier. Nikki today just graduated as a physician assistant. So really, happy ending to most stories, but, quite an experience here. Oh, Betty, you're my supervisor. I used to fly for Northwest Airlines, and Betty Anderson was my supervisor. That's pretty fun to see you. Thank you. All right, so I just want to share those couple of stories because you might have heard about some of those over the years. But again, the staff here has always been trained. Susan, Carol, and now we've got Cindy and Scott. Everybody here is always trained so well to handle any kind of emergency, and it's just a place of excellence that you want to bring people to. It's wonderful. Okay, so just so you know, a little history. So Ralph Nesbitt, I actually in 1988 went to a Historical Society board meeting to meet the board to find out more information about the house that Ron and I had purchased. And I, like a year later, was suddenly on the board thanks to Ralph Nesbitt, because I think they saw a 31-year-old and grabbed her because everybody else was getting up there. So I was the only person ever on the board that didn't actually, wasn't a descendant of actual ancestors that came here in the 1860s. So Ralph was my buddy, and Marianne, I loved your mother too. She was just wonderful. fun night for us was getting together with them for popcorn and lemonade. I mean, we just adored them. And I learned so much from Ralph about Muffy and Kurt's house, about this entire area. He knew the Griswolds very well, and he used to go help them with farming. He just was a wonderful, stellar person, as were all the people that lived in Muffy and Kurt's house. So we start with the Neal family coming here. Aaron Neal came from Canada. The rest of them came from Ireland, and I'm sure they were all related. Because everybody that came here in that era, they were all related in some way. They were Scotch-Irish, you know, wherever they came from. If they came from Czechoslovakia, they all went up north, and they were berry farmers, and they all stuck together. And down in this area, it was Scotch-Irish. And so then we have William McCoy, and he came here as well from Ireland, and he actually had a house down on the lake. So his house was down there, Aaron, and then William had Muffy and Kurt's house. So I did a little bit of research on this and looking at the maps that our board member Paul Ford put together for you. And so there were several of them. So you had two different houses, and the one that survived is Muffy and Kurt. So probably originally 1860s, there was a core of that house that was built. So after they left, they were there for a really long time. You had George and Sarah Cornwell, and they had 5 children. They died in 1912 and 1913, and they were there for some 30 years and lived to be quite elderly, and all of their children survived except for one into old age, which is unusual for that time period. And then you have the Frizzle family. I don't know a whole lot about them. In the 40 census, it shows the Griswold, Frank, and Lois, and that's how you got that wonderful Franlow Road named after Frank and Lois. And they had a large farm with a lot of cattle here as well. There was a hired man's house right where the diving pool was, right by the diving well. And then after that came the Saunders family, Charlie and Louise, and they ran Charlie's restaurant in Minneapolis. Here's where they grew their beef, right here on this land. And that operated for some 49 years. And they left, and actually Charlie had a heart attack on the farm. He lived another 3 years, but he died in '64, and Louise sold it to the preserve in 1982. And then the Johnsons came in 1986, and all of you came from that time period too. So a lot of really rich history. Fortunate to have this one of the barns. There were many, many barns on the property. It was a very large working cattle farm. And beautiful. You can imagine how beautiful this was. You know, and the lake was a real lake back then. It must have just been a beautiful place to farm and to raise a family. And so now the land is doing that with all of you being here with your families. Aaron and I. Do you have any questions at all?
So this is an original barn?
Yes, this is the original barn. Yep. One of them.
And this is the only surviving barn?
Yes. Yes, there were a lot of them. If you look at some of the pictures, there were like 6 barns. And that's where they had thought they could have 4 horses here. And they did for a while. That's actually how Muffy came here. She graduated as an equestrian, and she took care of the horses that were here. And Kurt came down to go riding. So,
What's the history of the lake, the size? You keep referring to
well, we
different
can look at
sizes.
the maps, and you can see, you know, this is Mill Lake. This is, they called it Lake Caroline at this time in 1855, but this is Starring.
Okay.
So if you look at, they're really close.
Ooh.
So, but it was an actual lake.
And what happened to it over the years then?
I think the farming.
Okay.
So they drained the lake,
Yeah.
Okay.
and in fact, this map shows the original lake is in a dotted line. And when they drained it, they divided the land up like a pie, and you can see who received all of that land. And on this map, the red line is the border of the preserve, and you can tell by the dotted line and the red line the shape of the current inlet. So it's pretty interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I, for one, am very thankful to the foresight and wisdom of the Nesbitt brothers, as well as the team of Carter and Gertz. Without their dream of building this community, none of us would be here today. I'm amazed to think that when the first homes were built here, there was still active farming going on. And I'm not sure if some of you longtime residents remember, but I'm told cattle grazed across the street from the first homes that were built here. So,
Our house was built in 1973, and there
Yeah.
were cattle grazing.
so I mean, that to me is a pretty phenomenal and interesting fact. I want to ask, I think we may have answered this earlier, but is anybody here, were you here in 1975 when the preserve pool opened and was dedicated? So we have 1, 2, wow, we have a lot of people that have been here for a long, long, long time. So there are laminated sheets with information about the Johnson House laying on one of our tables here if you want to read more about that. We missed the fact that Hubert Humphrey was a friend of the Griswolds, and in 1954, when he was running for his second term in the Senate, he stayed with the Griswolds while he was campaigning in this area. So that's what got him to know the preserve well, and why I think part of what attracted him to come back and help us with the dedication of our pool. So there's a letter that came from Hubert, there's another letter that came from Senator Mondale, both of them on different senatorial committees congratulating the preserve on their formation and getting rolling and so on. You know, Ron mentioned that in about 60 years, the city's only had 10 mayors. But in 50 years, the preserve has only had 5 general managers. I stand here as the 5th. And we're very honored to have 3 of my predecessors here tonight. And I'd like to recognize them. First of all, Keith Darling, who we believe is deceased, was not able to join us. Maybe he's with us in spirit. But he was followed by Ellen Law, who's right here in front of me. I've lost track of where people are, but Susan Dickman is here.
Can they come up to the front?
Sure.
Yeah. Come up to the front.
And Carol Baum-Ben is also here. And then there's me. You're welcome. Thank you, ladies. We all know that the important work really gets done by our office managers. And remarkably, over the last 30 years, we've only had 3 office managers. Unfortunately, Mary Klink is not well, and she was wanting to come and join us tonight, but unfortunately she wasn't able to. Barbara Hovland, who lives very nearby, had a previous engagement, but Cindy Fox is here. If you need your pool cards or want to rent the barn, or if the staff wants to get paid, that's the people that get it done. So actually they're pretty important people. I also want to recognize the hundreds of staff, board members, volunteers that have served our community over these 50 years. There's a list of the board members through the years, I believe attached to the wall over here. I'd like to recognize and thank all of them. One of the interviews I did over the last few weeks, I was asked what differentiated the preserve from other developments. Was it the 5 miles of walking paths? Was it the neighborhood playgrounds or the sand bottom pool? I said no. I said any neighborhood can build a playground. And many neighborhoods have sidewalks or paths, and many of them have pools. But this community has had a vision and a passion for 50 years, and it's supported the association, and it's because of all of you and everyone else who's ever lived here that we're all still able to be here today. So I think that you all should be congratulated at that support and that vision and that continuing. So thank you all. So this exhibit is going to remain up for the next few days. During office hours, 8:30 to 4:30 tomorrow and Friday. You're welcome to come anytime. Everything will be up along the sides, the slideshow will be turned on, and you're welcome to come and look at stuff that you maybe didn't get time to see tonight. Bring your friends, sit and talk, whatever you'd like to do. We may have some hours on Saturday. We're working as a volunteer to be up here so that it can be open a little bit on Saturday. But keep your ears open or check with us if you'd like to do that. We've got a jam-packed few days, and I'm hoping that you're able to join us as many events as possible. We have some schedules printed, and they're available if you'd like to take one and know what's going on the next few days. Thank you again so much for joining us. We have designed a commemorative bookmarker for you to take with you tonight as a remembrance of this moment in time. We also have cake and refreshments. You've been very patient, but if you'd like to stay for another moment or two, share any memories, make yourselves at home. This is your place. Thank you very much.